Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my series on my personal relationship with Star Trek. And today I'm going to talk to you about Deep Space Nine. I have a lot to say about it because it is my favorite of the Star Trek shows from this particular period, from the Next Generation, starting in the late 80s, on through the 90s, and then on into the aughts. There were four shows from this era: The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Voyager and Enterprise never really landed for me. I watched a few episodes, but never with any regularity. They just, for some reason, didn't strike home to me. So I'm not really going to talk about those at all. But Deep Space Nine, I've got a soft spot in my heart for this particular show because it showed me what Trek could be. It could retain that sense of fun while also dealing with some pretty complex issues and going to some dark places. So I want to start out, because this show is flawed, I want to start out with the negative side of things. So it's my favorite series, but there was one thing about it that I really did not like and still don't like: the Ferengi. Now, the Ferengi are an example of what I've come to call the misogynistic alien culture, or the Mac. And round about this period in science fiction television, Macs were everywhere. They seemed to get on every single show in one way or another. And it wouldn't really bother me if they were just on lousy shows, but they crept their way into shows that I otherwise liked, which makes me, present tense, disgusted with these Macs that pop up here, there, and everywhere. Now, during this period, it seemed like every science fiction TV show had to have a Mac episode at least. You had to have an episode where the female cast members, the female regular cast members, had to deal with a demeaning setup where the crew encounters a Mac, and they have to be humiliated or basically shoved to the side while the men dealt with them. You had an episode of Stargate where you had Samantha Carter having to cover up her face in order to deal with a Mac. Then there was Farscape, a show that I am quite fond of, dealing with a particularly violent Mac. And you have your female characters getting captured, and they have to be rescued by their male colleagues in drag. It's the worst episode of the series, bar none. It has no competition. So I'm not fond, as you can tell. And we still can't seem to move past these Macs, because now, or I should say most recently, the Orville has dealt with a Mac culture. And not just in one episode, but in a lot of episodes. And that's what we're dealing with when we look at the Ferengi. Because you have, well, they started out in The Next Generation, occasionally brought in as guest characters. And that's how I would have preferred them to have stayed. Show them every once in a while, maybe if you have to, but do not give them a major seat at the table. Well, with Deep Space Nine, they gave them that seat at the table. They brought on regular characters and semi regular characters who come from this misogynistic alien culture, and who do not attempt to disguise their misogyny. And we're evidently supposed to either laugh it off or excuse it as, quote, a part of their culture. Most of the episodes that showcased the Ferengi played their misogyny for laughs. We were supposed to find it a joke. It was held up to ridicule. I think they thought that since society was starting to move past misogyny, that it would be okay to laugh at it. But as recent moves in our culture, our popular culture, and our social and political culture have shown, we have not moved past misogyny. In fact, we may be in that quagmire more deeply than ever. So it's hard for me to find them funny. But probably my least favorite Ferengi moment on Deep Space Nine. I don't like this moment because it actually made me get angry with characters that I otherwise liked. Benjamin Sisko is my second favorite captain after Picard. I love him because we get to see multiple sides to him. He is not only a captain, he is a dad, and he gets involved in a recurring romantic relationship. He is a son. We do see his father appear. And I just like seeing those aspects of him explored. And I love him. Love the way Avery Brooks plays him. He's got this wonderfully deep bass voice. And so it just disappointed me when they brought him into a situation where his son Jake was angry because he'd gone on a double date with his Ferengi buddy Nog. And Nog had proceeded to humiliate and degrade the girl that he was with. This angered Jake, and Jake couldn't believe that his friend would behave like this. What was he acting like? And Cisco responds, "Oh, he's just acting like a Ferengi to me." In other words, he shouldn't let this misogyny come between him and his best buddy. Well, that just assumes that Jake and Nog are the only ones at the table. And I couldn't stop thinking about what about those young women? What are their feelings? Don't they matter? The fact that they were at this table watching and listening to this guy belittle them, was that just not important? No, it's just their culture. We just have to deal with that. And that was not that I don't really think that we should tolerate misogyny is ever a good message to send. So I really didn't like the heavy use of the Ferengi on Deep Space Nine. But despite that, I can't help loving this show because it introduced finally, this is the first Star Trek show to really get its women right. It gave them interesting storylines. It gave them interesting and complex personalities. It made them the kinds of characters that could actually be someone's favorite character. If you ask someone, who's your favorite character on Deep Space Nine, it's not out of the realm of possibility that somebody might actually say Major Kira Nerys or Science Officer Jadzia Dax. Dax is an interesting figure to explore gender issues with because she's actually a member of an alien species called the Trill. You have a Dax symbiont, and they inhabit a succession of host bodies over a succession of lifetimes. And Jadzia is the current host of the Dax symbiont. And she is smart, confident, funny, snarky when she needs to be. She won't take any guff from anyone. She is so wonderfully herself, and she has a sort of wisdom that I don't recall really seeing in any of the other Star Trek women up to that point. You have times when Troy and Crusher are criticized for being shrill, and there's even an episode in The Next Generation where Q, visiting Q, turns Crusher briefly into a barking dog. He wouldn't be able to get away with that stuff with Jadzia. I can't see Jadzia ever knuckling under to any kind of degradation like that. Just love her to pieces. And Major Kira Nerys is a little bit more complicated because she has a dark side. She has a past. She has been a Bajoran freedom fighter. She knows what it is to fight, and she knows what it is to kill, and she knows what it is to hate. And so they had very interesting ground to sow with this character. You can deal with questions of hate, residual PSD, questions of PTSD, questions of honor, and Kira is also very much a woman of faith. She believes in the prophets of her people. And that aspect of her character was also explored to great effect. She got a couple of romance plots that didn't feel like they took anything away from her character. They didn't reduce her character to just the love interest or take any agency away, at least long term, from her character. So it was wonderful to me to see these women on this show. Finally, I was getting the kind of heroines on Star Trek that I really love to see. Didn't last because unfortunately Terry Farrell had to leave the show or decided that she wanted to leave the show. And the Jadzia host was killed. The Dax symbiont went on inhabiting another host named Ezri, and Ezri is okay. I mean, I don't hate Ezri. I don't even really dislike her. And she did what she needed to do. She had her moments. There were times when she did get to shine. So she was at least allowed to be important to the show. But she's not Jadzia. So can't help but be a little disappointed. So this show explored a lot of interesting ideas to me, and although it had its flaws, one of the problems that I had is that when it came to relationships, when it came to the romantic relationships, it nearly always, as Quark might have said, playing a game in season one, it nearly always takes the safer path. There was a setup of an MM relationship. That could have happened. And all the groundwork was laid for this. And this was what a lot of fans actually wanted. But the writers and the people in charge said, nope, nope, we're going to put one of these characters in a heterosexual romance, which never really rang true. So that's a little bit disappointing. Even if they not that they necessarily would have had to have a gay relationship on the show. They could have even made the heterosexual relationships a little bit more interesting, but they just weren't. The show was at its weakest, I felt, when it was dealing with love and marriage. Although I did appreciate, again, Jadzia and Kira were both involved in romantic relationships, and they didn't lose any of their mojo by being in them. It was actually, I felt, the male characters' relationships that I just didn't enjoy all that much. But This still ranks as my favorite among the Star Trek shows of this area, of this era. Good Lord. It's late in the day. I'm recording this late in the day. So, era. So, that's why I'll always love Deep Space Nine and don't mind revisiting it from time to time. So, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.